on Boston Common this weekend. So an amazing event, amazing sculpture, one that I certainly am going to take a trip across the state to see, and I imagine others will do so as well. I may have to change where I'm looking because of the sun, so I'm just going to, and this may be better. So again, welcome to the values part of the orientation. Today, what I plan on doing is give you an overview of the last 35 years, basically, of values development at the agency, from '60s, and for in relationship to people with disabilities, then it was in the 1980s. To my hiring here at Nonotuck in 1987, to the initial development of our mission statement in 1988, which I'm just going to read right now because it's an amazing statement that we've reviewed on an ongoing basis and never have changed it. And the mission statement is Nonotuck Resource Associates and our affiliates link with other communities to create conditions for inclusion and social change. We will be reviewing again the mission statement again in the next couple of months as we delve deeper into our strategic planning process. So in 1988, also in 1988, we developed the key agency principles, which you can find in your policy manual, as well as the board of directors key agency principles in our principle on family. All three of those documents, again, have gone under scrutiny and review, and we've changed some of the language on some of it, just some of the wording, but the actual statement themselves have remained intact. And then the key agency, the key tenets of shared living were created in 1990 and really became the cornerstone of our values, which I'll explain. To the realization of our responsibility to the community and a social responsibility pact that was developed in 2001. When we started providing AFC services in 2006, we actually began to focus on the management's responsibility to our employees. We always had employees in mind, but we spent so much time really on thinking about the people we provide services to. We began to, and the community and our responsibility to the community, that we began really thinking about what our responsibilities were to our coworkers. So in 2007, we began our civility initiative, which I'll talk about. 2008, we added kindness to the civility initiative and around supervision. 2009, we had a diversity committee, but we really kickstarted the diversity committee, and we gave it full commitment. And then over the last couple of years, we showed our commitment by actually not hiring, but promoting the current coordinators of the chairpeople of the committee, Nicole and Janelle. And in 2022, at the end of 2022, our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee became the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee. Back in 2010, after extensive conversations that I had with a couple other organizations in the middle of the state, at that time it was called Alternatives, which is now Open Sky, and HMAA, who we have a really good working relationship. We began a wellness initiative within the agency. And that became a really important, and it continues to be a very important value within our organization. And I'll talk about the 2022 strategic plan and how that plan and the values that we're going to be reviewing this morning really will begin driving all of these values that I just spoke about. So to sort of go back to the beginning, I want to talk a little bit about my own development. But before I do that, I'm going to ask Gray to share a video it's a video by a man named Steve Taylor, whose journey was not unlike mine, and I think it will give you a sort of a sense uh, of what was going on in the 1960s and the 70s that led up to the 80s and led up actually to the birth of this organization in 1972, which was the beginning of deinstitutionalization. And there's and I think it's really good to look at the historical perspective because it was a much different time. And things have progressed a long way since I became involved in, I think, considered a movement, a deinstitutionalization movement, when people were housed in institutions and people were coming out into the community. And the service system was just getting organized. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think that Steve Taylor gives a really nice perspective for you about what was going on 50 years ago. Right?
Oh, the exciting early 1970s was a very exciting time in this field, even though I was just coming into it. I think a couple of things were happening. Many of us at the Center on Human Policy, especially students or recent PhDs, came out of the 1960s and were committed to civil rights. Were involved in anti-war movements. And for people like Doug Bicklin, Bob Bogdan, myself, and some others, it just struck us. This is the next civil rights movement. And that's the way I always saw this from the start. And the idealism that we had in the late 60s, early 70s about making the world a better place just seemed natural with this area of disability. That was one exciting thing. The other thing that was exciting about it is that uh, there were new movements growing. You know, the parent movement, okay, that really didn't start at all until 1950. And it really wasn't until the 1960s. And it became known that President Kennedy, JFK, had a sister with mental retardation, and Eunice Shriver, you know, was very vocal in talking about that. That made it easy for parents who had been stigmatized themselves to come out and to admit they had a child with mental retardation and to say, we're not going to accept traditional practices. We're not going to accept warehousing. We're not going to accept school exclusion. So the parents movement was developing. The other thing that I was aware of very early on, and although people in the field of mental retardation, as it was called, historically have been separated from people with physical and other disabilities. Uh, yeah, I started hearing about the independent living center movement and people like Ed Roberts, uh, who were demanding rights for people with physical disabilities. Uh, and the concept of independent living, yes, it's very, very different from normalization, but it was a new way of thinking and it challenged traditional practices. So, uh, and so anyway, you had the optimism of many people who had come out of the 1960s. You had some new movements developing. Uh, and I feel I was fortunate to be in Syracuse uh, because there was Burton Blatt. I was very fortunate. I mean, I felt for someone coming into this field in the 1970s. I was at the right place. Burton Blatt, okay, who was really one of the first professionals in the field to speak out publicly about the horrors of institutions. And as Bert said many times, he talked about it, it was a dirty little secret of professionals and researchers. They kind of knew that the conditions were bad, but they didn't do anything about it. They accepted it. Blatt was one of the first to challenge institutions, and he had created this place called the Center on Human Policy. Yes, to do some research, to do some policy analysis, but also to do advocacy, to try to change conditions. So Blatt was here. Thomas Szasz, a very well-known psychiatrist who started writing in the 1960s and beyond, questioning the concept of mental illness. And Szasz, wrote books like the myth of mental illness that challenged the psychiatric profession's definition of mental illness and involuntary treatment coercion of people who were defined as mentally ill. Szasz was in Syracuse, and he's 90 years old now. The guy still publishes books. I mean, on critique of the medical profession and the psychiatric professions. Very early on, I went to a public lecture sponsored by the Center on Human Policy that invited Szasz. In around 74, 75, we had other public lectures where we brought in advocates like Gunnar Dibwad, who, had been executive director of the National Parent Association. It was National Association for Retarded Children at the time. It's the arc of the U.S. today. And Gunnar was a strong advocate, and got to know Gunnar. I remember, Tom Gilhol coming to Syracuse, and Tom had been an attorney in, a famous right to education case in Pennsylvania. And then there was Wolf, who showed up here in 1973. So it was exciting because it felt like it was a time of change. And interesting thing about Bert Blatt is that at the Center on Human Policy, although Blatt
what Taylor describes as interesting and exciting times. I'm a child of the 60s. I sort of got my bones in civil rights movement back in the mid 60s and early 70s, or anti-war movement and other sort of causes during the 70s, and began sort of really developing my my values back then, my understanding of how I felt that I should treat others in this world, and how I believe that others might want to be treated. In 1980, I began working at the Center for Public Representation, and it was I was there on a one-year grant with the National Institute of Mental Health to work on the wards of the Northampton State Hospital and represent, as a legal advocate, people that had been incarcerated there, and try to, in some ways, to help them get out of the hospital as soon as they possibly could. The CPR, Center for Public Representation, was the organization, the law office that sued the state to close Northampton State Hospital. And so I worked with the attorneys there. The attorneys represented the people there to get them out of the hospital. They won a consent decree, which was a suit again in federal court, and it was agreement between then Governor Dukakis and the plaintiffs of Northampton State Hospital, with the plaintiffs being people who were there currently and any other people that were going to be there in the future. It was called the Brewster consent decree. He was the lead plaintiff in the suit. And the federal suit was an agreement to close Northampton State Hospital and create a community-based system of services for people in place of the institution itself. And the community-based services, and this is in 78, 79, 80, and really moved into the mid to late 80s to fulfill its promise of a community-based services. And this is just in Western Massachusetts, just people who are served by in the catchment area that where people would go to Northampton State Hospital if they were found potentially dangerous to themselves or others, which you and I can't be incarcerated based on that principle by itself, but they can because the second sort of means of understanding would be that they have a mental illness. So people can be incarcerated against their will for the potential of being dangerous to others and themselves as long as they have mental illness. So the community-based system was in the works. It was overseen by Judge Friedman out of the Springfield Federal Court. And it was based on a three-pronged system of residential, emergency services, and day programs. My one-year grant left me sort of done with, that was an amazing job working for CPR. And I moved right into that community system that was being built. And I moved into a local nonprofit that was providing services in group homes for people that primarily were coming out of the state hospital. I was a program director, and I was running several group homes where I clearly saw that although better than institutional care, there's something really amiss with people that were living in group homes. Where they had really no choice of where they were going to live, who were they going to live with, and were living really unauthentic lives as people were coming in and out of their lives on a regular basis. People were, staff were coming in and none of us lived that way, and it was sort of again, better than the institution, but a way that I wanted to see if there was something different. So I ended up, interestingly enough, in Syracuse and I went out there to meet with people from the Department of Human Policy, which Taylor was just describing, and I met a few people there. But what was most sort of impressing and absolutely transforming in my own life was while I was out there, I visited and I stayed in a L'Arche community. L'Arche is an international movement that began in the mid '60s by a man named Jean Vanier, who in a small village in France befriended a couple of people in the local institution and asked them if these two people from the institution would like to live with him. And they said yes, and so they began living together. It being the '60s, people began doing similar things. And throughout France, first in the village where Vanier lived, Jean Vanier lived, and then throughout France, people began living with people with intellectual disabilities. This isn't a new concept. There are places in some of the Scandinavian countries that this has been going on, where communities and towns took care of their mentally ill and their intellectually disabled people by opening their doors and opening their hearts to people for centuries. But it was new in many other respects, because outside of those Scandinavian countries and outside of families that decided to take care of their own, that where neighbors or people that had developed friendships and other types of relationships with people wanted to live with and support and share their lives with people with disabilities. So L'Arche, as I said, began as a movement. It actually turned into a movement and spread throughout France and other parts of Europe, and then into Northern Africa, and finally came into North America in the late 60s, early 70s in Canada, and then spilled over the border into Syracuse in the early 70s. When I got there, it had been in existence for several years, and people, there were 3 or 4 different situations where non-disabled people lived with people with disabilities, typically people with intellectual disabilities. It was transformative for me because of what I saw, and what I saw where people were living together. I saw that there was a mutuality of love between people, sort of based on an equity in that. There was a mutuality of respect. People were respected for their humanness. There was a vulnerability that, again, not often seen in disability services. I mean, one side, people with disabilities, their lives are an open book, literally an open file about some of the most discrete aspects of their lives, while us professionals keep it professional, and we don't give ourselves up to people with disabilities. And then there's a interdependence between people. Typically, as you know, people with disabilities are dependent on people, but in L'Arche and in L'Arche, I saw that the relationships had gotten to such an extent that, as an authentic relationship, both parties were dependent on each other. So there's a mutuality of dependence on each other. And finally, there was no financial profit gained from that relationship. In L'Arche, people are paid a very small stipend. Caregivers are paid a very, very small stipend for like room and board, and maybe a couple of bucks to get by in the week. They all have the hold down jobs. So these were what I consider that eventually turned in some of the values, in which I'll get into in a second, called life sharing. So I brought the sort of the transformative power and aspects of the L'Arche community back with me into the 80s, and under this nonprofit that I was working for, tried in some ways to move a couple of people out of the group home into life sharing situations, and was successful in a couple of aspects, in a couple of relationships, where people that had been living in a group home moved into life sharing situations with friends that they had gotten to know, and they lived together for many years. But it was not something that was embraced by the sort of the powers to be within the social service world. The governments weren't crazy about it. They didn't think it would work. And the agency that I worked for sort of was paternal in their aspects of it. Yeah, nice job, but that we're going to continue to fight our communities and force our communities to accept people in group homes. So in 1987, I applied for this job as the CEO of Nonotuck. I was fortunate to get the job, and initially I began to talk to people. At that time, there was the agency, which had been created in 1972 by a group of parents, 4 parents, whose kids at that time were at in the local state school institution, and they went against sort of the wisdom, or the supposed wisdom of the day then, which was not to have children with needs of intellectual disabilities mainstreamed into the basic community, but to in fact have people moved into that Belchertown State School, the state school that really covered all of Western Massachusetts. As Taylor reiterated, it didn't come about until the 60s, where parents began standing up and questioning institutions that they were told very early on in their sons or daughters' lives that the best place for them was at the state school, as opposed to, again, living and going to school amongst the rest of us. So anyway, they fought really hard, and what they were able to do is they were able to get money out of the legislature to open up what became in 1972 the first group residence. And it actually wasn't a group residence; it was sort of this parental model, where this husband and wife lived in this beautiful home in East Hampton with 4 kids from Belchertown State School. It was at that time the first community residence for with intellectual disabilities in the state. There were some really incredible local heroes there who fought really hard for those kids, while there was a clear resistance from the citizens, some of the citizens of East Hampton, to prevent 4 children from living in the community, 4 children with intellectual disabilities living in the community. But the heroes went out, and that was the birth of this great agency. And the agency obviously evolved, and as deinstitutional slowly took place, in Belchertown's sense, there was a consent decree also, but the money that that consent decree created was to clean up Belchertown State, not necessarily close it down. But there was some hard fought over the years, the next 20 years, really hard fought advocacy to close the institution, which it did. And now there hasn't been for many years now, served out of Belchertown. So the agency grew, and when I started here, it was full of group homes, basically in the East Hampton, Northampton, Amherst area. The agency was called Community Homes for Children. And when I was hired in 1987, one of the first things we did was change the name, since these children weren't children any longer. So we changed the name to Nonotuck Resource Associates. So I got hired in 87. One of the first things we did was the initial development in 88, as I said before, was the mission statement, which I read. And then to develop the key agency principles in 1988. And you can find those under your policy manual. But I'm going to read when it comes to family and board of directors, but I'm going to read the key agency principles. There are 10 of them. And again, they were developed in 1988. And I think they're as relevant and clear stated today as they were, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, 35 years ago. Number 1, to support each person to have an authentic and desirable home and home life. Home, in a sense, means comparable to what most citizens expect for themselves. 2, to remain committed to the people we serve as long as they choose to affiliate with the agency. To endeavor to provide continuity of the agency. To endeavor to provide continuity, stability, and consistency in the lives of those we support, and to establish other measures that allow security and residence and support. Number 3, to remain respectful of the unique value, dignity, and development of each person, irrespective of those times when this commitment may become difficult for the agency. Further, the agency endeavors to extend to each person ways of assistance that reinforce the person's identity as being comparable to others in the community in relationship to their needs, wants, and possibilities. In doing this, the agency commits itself to avoiding any practices which might be stigmatizing and demeaning to the person. So this particular line, this one right here, to remain respectful to the unique value, dignity, and development of each person, irrespective of those times when a commitment may become difficult for the agency. We fight, and we have historically fight incredibly hard, even when people are having their most difficult time of their life, to keep people in shared living and at home in their AFC program, as opposed to moving into other types of facilities, whether it be a nursing home or group home, et cetera. We bend over backwards to do that. We take it personally. Number 4 is to undertake and assist each person with life's interests, challenges, and activities that are most clearly relevant to their most fundamental and urgent aspirations and needs. 5, to facilitate in partnership with each person the acquisition of a range of personal relationships, memberships, and participation in the fullness of community and a variety of valued social roles suitable to the unique ambitions in life. 6, to honor the important, unique family ties of each person, seeking to ensure that these bonds are edified by the organization, by Nonotuck. 7, to recognize that people with disabilities are in jeopardy of not being seen as valuable and deserving of fair treatment relative to that which many citizens take for granted. To combat such stigma and establish an array of safeguards that will ensure that each person is fully respected by the agency and by other parties outside the agency. 8, to pledge that this agency remains focused on the people it serves, that the quality of their lives remains its first loyalty and priority. Contributions of all those who might share in the lives of the people we serve, e.g., family, relatives, providers, staff, friends, the board, neighbors, co-workers, roommates, and the community at large, etc. And finally, to remain considerate of and respectful to the communities in which we live and work, to welcome and invite the personal involvement of ordinary citizens in the lives of the people and the functioning of the agency. This includes the agency's care and trust with its resources. It's given in the name of the people receiving supports. Further, to operate the agency in an open, accountable, and self-critical manner. This is what we wrote 35 years ago. And it's as relevant and I think is as amazing. I don't think that to this day, I mean, if I would have a hard time writing those words that we created 35 years ago. They're amazing. And it's something that I'm really proud of, not necessarily because I was part of the authorship of them, but I'm really proud of the fact that I work for an agency that lives by these, that strives to live by these 10 tenets. Very important and very an amazing document. Something that, again, we review on a regular basis and we've really never changed it. So then that was in 1988, 89, and then in 1990. I've been on the job for 3 years, and I began discussing an alternative to the group homes. I've been discussing that with the people we provided services to back then, which was around 50, 60, between 50 and 60 people. Their family members, DDS, and saying, and trying in some way to get at the those tenants that I saw at L'Arche in some way to do it at Nonotuck. And so a group of us began meeting on a regular basis to talk about what life sharing was for us in our own lives. And that we could then begin to really decide what it meant for other people. And if we were looking to create truly authentic lives, to be part of creating authentic lives for the people we provide services to, then how would that look? What would the a situation like that look like? And what I'd seen at L'Arche made sense of what, what was important in my life and the people that we were talking about. I think they're important in your life. And that's a mutuality of love, that when you get in a relationship, that you want the relationship to be lovingly mutual, that you want to love, you want to be able to love, and you also want to be loved. And for people with intellectual disabilities, particularly people that have been institutionalized, that they've really never had that opportunity uh, to have that mutual relationship of love. The second thing is the mutuality of respect. And uh, and we talk about that is that, I mean, we look beyond, we understand and we accept people that have disabilities. We accept their disabilities, and people accept their disability. There are some people with disabilities now want it to be known as part of who they are, as opposed to, I mean, one of the great sort of arguments and considerations these days is, do we say somebody who happens, this is a person, when we describe somebody we know, is this a person, is David is a person that happens to have a disability, or do we put the disability first? David's disability is David, and there's a balance there, and but it's the respect for people's humanness as being human, and that mutuality of that. I mean, it's in our own relationships. That's what we want. We want to, we can only love and can only be close to people in authentic lives and in the balance of relationships if we respect that person and we feel as though we are respected. The third part of this is something that we sort of attached later on when we got more and more into Brene Brown, and we actually showed that Brene Brown TED Talk on vulnerability, and realized that we really couldn't love without really making the leap and being vulnerable in front of the person that we truly loved. And it's so clear that this is part of what we wanted for authentic relationships and authentic love, is that because, as I said before, because people with disabilities are vulnerable in front of us, we know their most intimate situations, that it has to be that where do we create situations where people are willing to, the non-disabled person is willing to become vulnerable in front of the disabled person, so that there is that opportunity for true love. And finally, it's the mutuality of dependence, where one person is as dependent on the other as the other on that person. In all our best relationships, there's a mutuality of dependence. We depend on people being here. And so we began talking, where can we do that? And it was pretty clear that people had to live together for these things to happen. Now all of them might happen, but to move into what we consider life sharing, but most of them could. And that I've seen over the last 35 years is that people began in shared living situations and then moved into life sharing situations, just naturally moved in when those four tenets of shared living then moved into life sharing, and in an upper dialectic moved into shared living. So that became the core value of this organization, is that we were going to help create authentic lives based on those four tenets. And we did it. And we moved in between the years 1991 and 1993, over 55 people from group homes. We closed 13 group homes, moved 55 people from across Western Massachusetts. into shared living situations. Of all the people that we were providing services to from those years, there was only one person whose guardian decided that they didn't want the person to move into shared living. And so he moved into a group home. But it was an amazing and it was an amazing period of this organization. There's been no other organization that's done that in the state, which was completely committed to shared living, completely committed to never creating a group home. We now serve about 340, 350 people in shared living. For the largest shared living organization. Obviously, we provide services across the state. So that was done in the 90s, and then we sort of hunkered down. We wanted to spend as much time as we could on making sure the services that we were providing were as good as they could be. No one ever made that change. We were proving that a shared living, which was thought of as a service that people graduated from group homes into, we proved that that even the most sort of notorious, and I put that in air quotations, notorious, and people that had the greatest needs were people that could be transformed into shared living. We were about halfway, 3/4 of the way through closing all our group homes, and DDS started freaking out, saying, "Oh my God, what's happening here? They're moving too quickly." And so I put together this meeting between about 15 people that had moved into shared living and their families, and we met with the regional director, the area director, and the assistant commissioner of DDS at Cooley Dickinson Hospital one time. And as people went across the room and talked about shared living, every single parent and every single person that had moved into shared living said, do not even begin to think about moving my son, my daughter, my brother, my sister, me back into a group home. And as I was walking out of the meeting, the assistant commissioner looked at me and said, "That's the most incredible meeting that I've ever been to." We had a union back then who sued Nonotuck to move everybody out of shared living and back into the group homes so that people's jobs staffs whose jobs were lost at the time when we closed the group home could then get their jobs back. Federal court judge said, no way. And what we saw was, and what we see to this day, is the transformative power of shared living and the mutuality of love, respect, interdependence, and vulnerability. In early 2000, the next value we began to embrace was our social responsibility value, where we encouraged and allowed staff to take on outside volunteer work to give back to the community. And so we had just about everybody back in 2001, 2002 who worked at the agency, we were significantly smaller then, who in some way gave back to the community. I coached a couple of basketball teams and baseball teams, and worked on and was a member of the school committee in my small town of Williamsburg. Our former CFO did tax returns for people, all in the sense of at some point, the goal was to introduce the larger community to people that happen to be marginalized. So that was the social responsibility. And then in 2006, when we started our AFC program, we began to add to our value systems. And in 2007, we began the civility initiative. There's a video that's posted on our YouTube channel that I encourage you to watch about how that started. It actually started in 2007 because I was I was tired of the discourse, the national discourse, and the incivility that was really beginning to surround us all. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to create or help create an organization where people, staff could find a respite when they went to work, and they found a place where people were going to be civil to one another, and away from sort of the national discourse. I mean, it's only gotten worse since '07, but it's very interesting that how embedded the questions and the concerns of civility are at this organization now. Um, and it's in every, should be theoretically, it's in every supervision that people talk about, and civility and staff meetings, civility, etc. Shortly after the civility initiative took heart, then we added kindness to the civility initiative. And it's one thing being civil, it's another thing being kind. And we just wanted to make sure that people were kind here to one another, that we like civility, but we really like civility and kindness. And so we talk about kindness now, and kindness became a real core value of the organization. And that was in '08 and '09. We sort of rebooted our diversity committee, and we made a full commitment to our diversity within our organization and what that meant. We sort of doubled down on it recently in the last couple of years when we gave part of Nicole and Janelle's job description as being the chairs of the diversity committee. And we were actually given, or Nicole and Janelle were given an award by our excellent trade organization, ADDP, as for the work they've done within Nonotuck, and the work that Nonotuck, because of them and other people on the committee, have done to underscore our commitment across the board to diversity within the organization. And so that started in '09. Again, we doubled down to it about 5 or 6 years ago, and are very proud of where we are with the diversity committee now. In 2010, I began talking to other organizations about wellness and what they're doing with wellness. We began a wellness initiative in the organization in 2010, and then we committed to it in a larger way by hiring a coordinator of our wellness program. And so in my supervisions and in the ET supervisions, the first two items on every agenda that we create in our supervisions are civility and wellness. Actually, it's wellness and civility. We really take heart on how people are doing, particularly these days, and how people have come out of the pandemic. Mental health issues are significant. We're looking at that much more closely. And with people working remotely, I think it's a much more, it's a greater concern of ours. And so wellness is an important initiative for us. And finally, the strategic plan that we're currently in, the strategic plan of 2022, is going to wrap all these things around. I mean, we have 5 what we call focus areas. One of them is values, which includes the civility and the wellness and the kindness sort of initiatives. And so we are going to be developing a plan around values and the civility and wellness. The other, second focus area is around DEI and B. And we have a 5-year plan around the development of that. And the other 3 are focus area growth and change and growth, and the service excellence, and finally organizational health. And what we found is that all focus areas are so intertwined that they're sort of meshing and they're beginning to work with one another. So there's going to be a full sort of implementation of values within DE&I. Of course, they have values on their own: service excellence, or organizational health, change and growth. You can't have the values that you want, and if you want to change, then you have to be solid in your values and your thinking and your ethics before you can change. And if you want to grow, you have to have the values, etc. If you want to change and you want to grow, then you have to have the importance of diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging as a stronghold within the organization to grow. This organization, when I started here, annualized budget was a little bit, this was 35 years ago, 36 now, I guess, was $1 million. This year, it's we created a budget of $50 million. And the only way this organization was able to grow, we grew basically one person at a time by increasing and developing our shared living program, one person at a time, and the same with our AFC program. But the reason that we were able to do that is because of the in fact, it's only gotten stronger with the addition of wellness and civility and DEI and B and other things that we've included there. And how we care for begins with how we care for those people we provide services to. And it adds on to it how we care for our employees and the people that are providing those services. And we care for our caregivers, and we care for our coworkers, and we go over and over, and we underscore those, and we try over and over again to add and strengthen those aspects of this organization, which makes it incredibly unique and different and a great organization. So I have about 6 minutes to take any questions. Do people have any comments or questions they'd like to make? Raise your hand.
Feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. I'll read them for you.
Okay, well, if anybody is shy, it's okay, I understand that. Fire off an email to me. Don't be shy about that. I respond to all emails that are sent to me, and may take a day or so, but and answer a question. I'd love to hear your comments, and I hope that that what I said today is something that you felt already, that we are treating you well, that we find your coworkers civil and kind. You find that the organization really is concerned about your wellness, that we find social issues and the diversity initiatives that sort of connect with you, that the agency is connected to you in ways that we hope that make you feel like you like being here and that you want to stay here and you feel as though you're being treated well. So that's what our hope is. So send me an email, comments, questions, whatever. I appreciate it, and I hope and I look forward to your long stay here. I've always felt as though new employees are a gift to this organization. You have so much to give to us that we accept you as your gift to us. So thank you for who you are, and have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, George. Thanks for that.
Well, thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Just a quick
Okay.
note. First of all, awesome way to kick off orientation day one. Appreciate you guys being here. If you haven't signed into the chat, please do so we can give you credit. And tomorrow we're going to continue, actually start officially with department overviews. Everyone should have gotten an invite for that. So we're going to do clinical department overview, and that's going to be starting at 9:30. So we're going to be 9:30 usually is the go time. And they vary in length. So it depends on the department head, right? It could be half hour, could be less, could be a little bit more. So like I said, thanks for being here. We're excited to have you guys on the Nonotuck team, and looking forward to seeing more of you in the coming weeks. And reach out to myself or Rob if you have any questions or concerns orientation wise. All right.
Thanks, Grayson.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everyone.
much.
Have a great day. Take care.
All right, you also.
Have a good day,
Bye.
everyone.